Alright, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the Neo-Decadence lecture. I'm your host, Colby Smith, and basically what we're going to do is that we're going to run down the what makes up Neo-Decadence, its precursors, its philosophy, etc. Now, even though Neo-Decadence has no precedence to the original decadent movement as it is, I think it's only proper to give context of what decadence is because, you know, the namesake. Decadence emerged in France in the late 19th century. It's the first work that spawned decadence is controversial. Some scholars say Le Fleur du Mal by Charles Baudelaire, and others Our Droit or Against Nature by Joris Calvi-Monde. In any case, it opposed bourgeois morale and the naturalist literary movement. Now, naturalism emphasized realism in its expression, while decadence emphasizes exuberance. Wasserman actually described decadence as a sort of spiritual naturalism. Some notable figures: Wasserman, as I've talked about, there he is at his desk. Octave Mirbeau, most famous for The Torture Garden. Oscar Wilde is actually sometimes lumped into the decadent movement with his novel The Picture of Dorian Gray. Arthur Machen, another Brit, whose most famous work is probably the long story The Great God Pan, which horror writer Stephen King once called the greatest horror story ever told. Théophile Gautier, Jean Lorrain, Marcel Schwab, who is famous for influencing Borges's first short story collection, Frederick Baron Corvo Rolfe, and the cantankerous Catholic Leon Bloy. And so we move on to Neo-Decadence. What Neo-Decadence stands for, it is against writers' workshops and writers' craft. Institutions like the Iowa's Writers' Workshop that seek out to homogenize literature and castrate all method of experimentation. It is anti-capitalist, anti-consumerist, it is an explicitly leftist literature, so centrist, apolitical, and right-wing neo-decadent stories simply cannot exist. It is against sincerity in writing, and what I mean by sincerity is the mode of writing that seeks to tell a story from the heart. So your David Foster Wallace's, your Jonathan Franzen's, Neo-Decadence is against that. It promotes deeply experimental scenarios and prose, including explicit endorsement of lack of character development and story arcs. And it would be a mistake to classify Neo-Decadence as a tentacle of weird fiction, pun intended, because it rejects the overtly fantastic. Now, this does not mean fantastic elements can be wholly excluded from Neo-Decadence. It simply just cannot be the focal point of the story. Some precursors to Neo-Decadence are the gay transgressive novelist Dennis Cooper, who is pictured, isn't he handsome? J.G. Ballard, who, especially his Vermilion Sands stories. Kathy Aker, the punk feminist poet, most famous for Blood and Guts in high school, and the great postmodernist guru William S. Burroughs. Some neo-decadent practitioners today, Brendan Connell, who devised the first manifesto of neo-decadence and whose primary focus is new wave, symbolist, and decadent fiction. Quentin S. Crisp, pictured here, who's mostly influenced by the Japanese modernists, Justin Isis, who will be calling in a few minutes, Yarrow Paisley, Damian Murphy, who specializes in occult fiction, Ursula Flug, Colin Insole, James Champagne, and Gia Files, who's actually a New York-based artist that makes these really wild acid blotter portraits of young girls doing insane things. Really bizarre stuff. And on that note, we shall call Justin Isis. Hello, Justin.
What's up?
The lecture's going on.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. Can you all hear Justin?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, they can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, so no video on that end, or?
Yeah, no video on this end, unfortunately. But we've got somebody recording.
Okay, great. Alright, so which part are we up to in the program then?
Well, I just finished the PowerPoint presentation, so I guess just give us a little bit of background of who you are, I guess.
Okay, yeah, I'm Justin Isis, if you don't know. And I'm the editor of the Neo-Decadence anthology, in which Colby has a story, which I think you're going to read after this, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Yep. And I'm currently based out of Tokyo and been writing and publishing for about going on 10 years. I think the first book came out about a little under maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And yeah, this project we were just putting out, it's pretty diverse, and there's writers from more or less all over the world, including some like Colby, who's just making their debut with this project.
All right, cool. So, I guess a question that I've been really meaning to ask you before we go on to what you've been wanting to say, I guess, is how did you and Brendan Connell and Daniel Corrick come up with Neo-Decadence in the first place?
How did we come up with it? It was originally Brendan wrote the initial manifesto. I mean, I'm not sure how serious he was originally. And then Daniel had the idea of actually doing an anthology, but didn't really pursue it. So, I think by the time the three of us got together, we just kind of kept kicking the idea around, and eventually came to the decision to go ahead with it. But I still feel like all three of our ideas of what it is or what it means are kind of not entirely in agreement. So, I mean, I can talk about what my idea of what it means, of what Neo-Decadence is, but I think Brendan's take on it and even Dan's is a little bit different.
Yes, I see. Awesome. So, I mentioned that you had a manifesto of Neo-Decadence to the audience. You want to go over some of the key points of that?
Yeah, I'm not gonna just like read out the manifesto, but I'm gonna maybe just talk about it a little bit. Maybe it can hopefully shed some light on it. Maybe make it kind of clearer. I'm wondering like So you did this PowerPoint where you kind of introduced some of the background.
Yeah, basically what decadence is, some notable figures, like I talked about Weezmons a little bit in depth, and Merbo and stuff.
Okay, good. Yeah, I guess just to like kind of frame this, like, I was just wondering if I could maybe ask whoever's there, like, what, if they're kind of familiar with this background of French literature in the 19th century. Has anyone read like Flaubert or Zola or Wasserman?
Yeah, some of them, one of them's read Zola and Flaubert.
Okay, good, yeah. I guess probably the reason I asked that is, I mean, for me, I think, you know, we call it Neo-Decadence, but I guess we almost call it like post-naturalism in a way too. So at least for me, I mean, personally, with what I'm writing and what I intended for this project or my contribution to it, is very much coming out of that kind of like naturalist headspace, I guess you could say. So if you've read if anyone there has read some of those, like, I guess you could call them like OG, you know, naturalist writers like Zola or Flaubert, especially maybe Flaubert, Sentimental Education, and a lot of those Zola books, there's that sense of taking more, almost like a more sociological approach to portraying action with the characters. So I think like naturalism has its limitations too, but I actually feel like what we think of as kind of more recent fiction could kind of like do with more of that in terms of looking at characters as being more the product of socioeconomic forces and cultural forces as much as being unitary individuals, I guess you could say, if that makes any sense. So that's kind of my background in wanting to do that, is wanting to look at characters in terms of the cultural forces that kind of compel their actions, I would say. So that's kind of the base board for me, is I would say almost post-naturalism, or wanting to kind of update that Flaubert is a lot approach to where we're at maybe now. And then with Neo-Decadence, I mean, you can look at that as maybe focusing more stylistically on how to represent that. So I would maybe is also make a distinction between what I would term maybe naive realism, which is what I would term most of the kind of approach taken by what we consider, you know, literary writing, or maybe like prize-winning writing at the moment. Seems to me kind of like a naively realist approach, where certain assumptions are made about either the stability of the characters, or I don't know what you would call it, relatability of the characters, or things like that. And I would like to, at least through my own writing, I usually try to kind of take a step back from those assumptions and maybe look at the characters in a different light, or have a bit more of a scientific approach to them, maybe. Although I'm not really sure what extent the original naturalism was actually that scientific, or characters are being constrained, or how their values are being constrained. Or you get the other tack where there's kind of a gesture in that direction, and but you're still basically assured that everything is all right in the end. You know, no real changes need to be made. So, and I think one way of maybe of maybe correcting that is just being hard on the characters. It's not being afraid to be hard on the characters and not needing to have the characters be particularly likable or particularly, I guess they say like relatable is the word they use now. But I personally like I never really think of it that way, and I never. In fact, I mean, I mostly write about characters that I actually quite dislike, I guess I could say. But I try to dislike them fairly, I guess, and try to maybe show why they're that way and how they wound up that way.
I have a question.
She has another question.
I'm sorry, I hope I'm not taking or hogging all this space. I don't mean to do that.
Oh no, you're fine.
As he says that he draws his characters from real life people, has he ever sort of manipulated somebody in reality to create a character out of that person?
Did you hear that?
Sorry, please.
Because that would be better on Neo-Decadence, I guess.
She asked on your point on using real life people in your fiction. Have you ever manipulated somebody to have them act a certain way?
To create characters out of them.
To create characters out of them, yeah.
No, I'm usually pretty dishonest, and I was just telling them if I'm going to do that, and mostly the reaction has just been, I don't care, because I mean most of the people I'm writing about can't even like read English really, and they don't seem particularly concerned with obscure fiction in a foreign language, which may be inspired by them. So I'm usually just telling people, and I'm not getting. Mostly just getting fairly indifferent reactions. No one seems interested in following it up or pursuing it or learning to read English to the extent that they would be able to engage with that. So it hasn't been a huge issue in that sense.
I have a question. So you talk about like not necessarily feeling like you have to make characters relatable, but it sounds to me like you're still trying to create characters, obviously, that you can like elicit empathy for your reader. And I mean, is that?
Yeah, elicit empathy. I think there's that element where, I guess you could argue that people are naturally empathetic, and I think if you portray something accurately, there's going to be an element of empathy, but I try not to. I think we've kind of gone so overboard with that sense of trying to maybe redeem the characters or maybe have empathy for them or whatever, that we sometimes just don't even look at them accurately, and I think sometimes it's almost a lot of times I think, well, if why do I feel interested or compelled to write about these characters? And a lot of the time it is because I see things I maybe really dislike or personally upset by, but I try to kind of usually try to suspend judgment and just try to look at that kind of accurately. So yeah, I think there is empathy there, or there should be, but I do feel like most people, or at least a lot of writers that I see, are taking this tack that if you don't like the characters, then no one's going to want to read it, or it's not going to be possible to engage with. And I don't really think that's the case, because and I always think that maybe having more difficult or having more unlikable or not readily, I guess, like relatable characters is kind of does broaden empathy maybe by forcing them to think, well, why are they like that, or how did they become like that, or what's going on there, maybe beneath the surface.
I guess
there's an aspect to it.
Because it sometimes seems like writers will sort of use relatability as a shortcut to creating an empathetic character. Like if you just write a character that's a lot like your reader.
I'm very suspicious of that. And
Yeah.
I usually think I usually feel like that's kind of a cheat. And I also feel it's kind of presumptuous in a way because I usually feel in those cases the writer is assuming they know what the reader will find likable or relatable. So I think by doing that, they're almost like trying to predetermine your reaction, and I'm very kind of like sensitive to that. So I usually kind of react not so well to that, and I think especially we're kind of in this stage where writers are trying to have what they would claim as positive portrayals. I mean, there's a lot of, obviously you want to have fair and accurate portrayals of all different groups of people and all different demographics of people, but I think there's this almost like subtle pressure to have relatability or likability, I guess, and I think I do feel like it usually ends up simplifying or kind of leading to less interesting results than if you just maybe presented more complexity or maybe been willing to follow unlikable characters a little bit further and look at like why they're that way or what is really going on there.
That's really interesting.
Any more questions? All right, so I think on that note, I think I'll let you go and I'll get back to my reading.
Okay, great, yeah. Well, yeah, thanks for everyone who turned out, and I hope you enjoy the book. I mean, this thing is coming out in April, and it'll be available on Amazon and directly from the publisher, Snugly, and Book Depository, and a bunch of other places. So, yeah, check it out. I think it's a really diverse book. I mean, there's no two stories have really similar styles or similar settings or really similar anything. So, I think it should give people a lot to. I think it'll be something that most people will find of interest in the book.
Well, it was great talking to you, Justin, as always.
Okay, great. Yeah, let's, Brandon, you have anything to say?
Right, some good stuff, guys.
Alright, guys, well, yeah, thanks everyone who, once again, turned out, and thank you, Colby. So, enjoy the reading.
Yeah, catch you later, man.
Take care.
Cool.
All right, so on that note,
Trying to take, I think because our current international culture is so kind of fragmented into these very specialized areas, specialized markets. You can look at it as target market groups or specialized cultural areas. So I think there is this room to kind of move into these spaces and inhabit them and look at how they construct the characters as much as they are constructed by the characters.
yeah, that's pretty fascinating. I guess I'm going to open up the floor to questions.
Yeah, any questions?
I would like to ask something.
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So when you say that you're taking a more scientific approach towards creating your characters and at the same time keeping them in the social, cultural, economic context, how are you sort of coordinating these forces to make your characters?
Did you catch that?
No, I'm sorry, can we maybe repeat that or?
So when you take a scientific approach to create a character, am I audible?
Is she audible?
No.
You might have to move closer.
Maybe I could just write down my question and pass it to you.
Yeah, that would be all right. She's gonna write it down and pass it to me.
Okay, yeah, sorry.
I apologize. All right, here we go.
That's close to my home.
Yep.
That would be wonderful.
She asks, when you say that you create your characters scientifically and eco-socially with economic forces in the background, how do you coordinate these elements?
How do I coordinate them? Well, I try to take as much as I can from real life. Even to the extent of just directly just using real people as characters. And I usually just tell people I'm doing this and try to get a sense of where they're coming from. And as I said, I mean narrowing it down to specific. I guess another way to look at that question would be there seems to be a lot of concern recently with the idea of almost like identity politics in depictions in literature, and I think there's kind of maybe like a trepidation or kind of hesitation that some people seem to feel about at the moment about maybe writing outside of their well, I guess like their race or their gender or their socioeconomic class or even their national background. And I think that's kind of it's kind of an interesting area, because I think most of the really interesting writing is kind of coming out of that area where you're actually forcing yourself to investigate something that you maybe didn't know that much about. So for me at least, I try to do a lot of research. I mean, if I'm depicting someone, or if I'm depicting what I consider a kind of scene, I usually want to know as much about it as I can, and I usually do spend a lot of time researching that, almost kind of obsessively, and looking up lots of information, whether that comes down to right down to the level of what people are wearing, or what brands they're wearing, or what their backgrounds are. So I think one of the corollaries of that with Neo-Decadence is this attempt to kind of broaden that cross-cultural sphere, or sphere of concern, or sphere of engagement, because otherwise things do get pretty boring, or we're not really addressing what is going on in the world, or what interesting things we could be paying attention to. I mean, I think the sphere of attention, or the sphere of concern with a lot of modern fiction is very limited. It's a very limited, milieu, or you could say mostly limited to, at least in the English-speaking world, or the Anglosphere, as you could call it. Most of the people on major publishers publishing books are portraying this rather narrow slice of, New York or London upper middle class life, I guess you could say. And I think there's a real danger with that, which is that, literature rapidly becomes this kind of cul-de-sac where the concerns and demographics being represented and expressed are quite narrow and quite limited. And I think one of the reasons for this book, and maybe for trying to encourage this, is to kind of get that sense of an expanded sphere of concern and engaging with things happening in other countries and maybe other demographics that are not being represented as much, or at least not in what I would consider an interesting way. I don't know if that answers the question.
Yeah, that answers the question. Any others? It's not looking like it.
Nothing much. How many people is out there? I can't see who's out there, so I'm just imagining.
Unfortunately, like a bunch of people had to call it quits last minute, so there's like 4 here.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to hear what is. I assume most people there are students. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be interested to see what. Just to kind of solicit everyone who's there's opinion on where. Maybe where things are going, or maybe get their take on what this is about, if they're interested.
Any volunteers?
I didn't get what he
I'm
said.
sorry, what?
I didn't get what he asked.
She didn't understand what you were asking. Like, get their impressions on Neo-Decadence, or?
Yeah, I mean, I'm interested to hear what background people. I mean, again, if there's maybe 4 people there, I'm wondering what background they have in what they're reading, what they're even to the level of just what they're reading at the moment, or what kind of concerns they would like to see in literature in the future.
Yes, I see. Any volunteers?
Actually, I was happy when you were discussing the manifesto, and I read things like anti-capitalist and anti-consumerist. One is looking forward to more writings in that area, especially in the current times when people are really scared to call themselves, leftists or Marxists or feminists. I think these are important areas of intervention. I don't know if I was audible yet.
Yeah, you should ask him if she really
Did you catch that?
Mentioning the manifesto, I caught up a little bit there.
Yeah, she was talking about how Neo-Decadence is anti-capitalist and anti-consumerist, and she believes that that kind of stuff has to be addressed more in an age where people are scared to call themselves leftists or Marxists or feminists.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I mean, definitely. My means of doing that is, at least in the things I'm working on or the things I'm writing now, I try to, I think probably the best way to do that is just to portray as accurately as possible what kind of conditions are created by global capitalism, right down to the level of individual values and what kind of lifestyles I would say are kind of people are constrained into, or maybe the characters are constrained into. So I usually feel like I try to take an almost kind of like surgical approach where, I mean, like personally, my personal politics are fairly, you know, far leftist, but I usually feel that the best way to do that, or at least the best way to portray that fictionally, is almost in a more, almost kind of diagnostic way where you simply choose a group of people or choose some characters and see how their economic circumstances are forcing them to behave in a way, and it's really not. I don't think it's terribly difficult to do that at the moment because the constraints that are forced on most people are pretty obvious and are going to be kind of apparent if you choose to do that. So I definitely do think that is a good point. I mean, I think one thing with this, I think, you know, the people that, you know, as speaking for Brandon Connell and for myself at least, I mean, we're both pretty on the far kind of leftist spectrum, and I wouldn't really say any of our writing is overtly super political, but there's definitely that sense of, at least for myself, I try to take this kind of diagnostic approach of trying to depict what these prevailing kind of, you know, material conditions are constraining the characters into, or constraining the values into in a lot of cases.
So kind of like what Upton Sinclair did in The Jungle, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's that aspect of it. I mean, I wouldn't. I think that the danger with any kind of naturalist, or you could say Marxist, or kind of writing is that you run the risk of pushing things to such a programmatic extent that you kind of simplify what is happening. And I don't think it should be simplified, but I do think there's definitely that sense in which most mainstream literature, or at least a lot of prize-winning literature is kind of off in this kind of apolitical fantasy land of, you know, you could say neo-realism, or, you know, kind of psychological disconnection from any kind of, you know, economic.
Into the anthology called Somni Draconis, which in Latin means dragon dreams. I go to.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Could you share the name of the book?
Drowning in Beauty, the Neo-Decadent anthology. I go to the shore to think, even though it offers no insight, nor does it inspire anything novel. Here the world is achromatic. My provider isn't covered out here, so my smartphone can't vampirize my time. Huge rocks, scales shed from a gigantic reptile, litter the beach as if limestone cliffs that veil the coast were struck by rockets. Here the water which performs cunnilingus on the continent is gray as roadside slush, showing its true age. Gulls soar overhead, but they do not cry out. Better kites than dinosaurs. Exponential frequency in reports of museum collections disemboweled by thieves. Lately I've become sufficiently paranoid of media. My body blushes with extreme anxiety and sadness when an advertisement offers my wife or my daughter more things than I could ever offer them. All that I can offer them originates from my companies behind the advertisements. Any aspect of an advertisement has the potential to inflame my emotions. The general color scheme, the absurdly hygienic bodies of the actors and actresses, the therapeutic and seductive tones in their voices, the jingles that my family memorizes instantaneously when they never bother to memorize equally mundane top 40s or nursery rhymes or folk songs, etc. Packaging can also elicit a response. For instance, when I go to the pharmacy to obtain my monthly refill of Prozac, 40 milligrams daily, AM, taken with food, they wrap the bottles in cellophane embroidered with myriad cartoon hearts and a label on the front and back of the wrapper that reads, "We care." I get depressed when I read it, because I know the manufacturers of that plastic wrap are feigning their concern for my well-being for the sake of profit through argumentum ad sincere. On one extremity of the beach I see a billboard, a dead wind-up key jammed in the earth, advertising an allegedly cheap rate for a Holiday Inn located 2.5 kilometers down the road. I begin to weep when I saw the exclamation mark asserting the fairness of these deals. New black market hype derived from the ancient Chinese medicinal canon. I wipe my eyes and, from the polar extremity of the beach, the first human I have seen all morning approaches. In his hand he clutches a dowsing rod. The instrument licks the air like a snake, searching out the warmth of beloved minerals. Every dozen paces or so, he picks up a rock, examines it, then feeds it to the ocean. I approach him as he makes his 7th round. The folds of his black tweed coat applaud in the lapping wind. It is quite baggy on his bonsai frame. From his breast pocket shoots a cluster of dead yarrow. I suppose the bees don't bother him much as those plants are stiff as evil. But it is a shame they must drive the butterflies away. He appears to be slightly over 40, glasses filthy, taut lips ready to speak the first canto of the comedy whenever. His yam-colored hair, made wiry by the alkaline breath of the Atlantic, spills down his back and shoulders in gentle coils, in which farmers upturn dragon bones while plowing fields. "Excuse me, what are you looking for, and why aren't you using a metal detector?" The man squints like a vacuole and replies in a sleepy, viscous voice, as if his vocal cords were overcranked, or he was hearing every vowel and consonant echo against his elvish ears. "You might suppose I am a prospector, but I do not prospect metals rare or common. I seek the sex of stones." The priests would then grind up the bones and employ their supposed properties against metaphysical ailments, chi imbalance, dimming souls, rotting spirits from old possessions. I don't believe rocks have genitals. The man thrusts... I'm sorry, I lost my place. The man thrusts his face towards mine and pried open his lips with a bright eye. "You suppose you see straight, yes? When I consider your eyes, I see that your horizon is a horseshoe, and you will notice likewise with my horizon. When Schrödinger conceived the undead cat, he became a sage and discovered that nature is not merely nature, but the perpetual coupling of nature and unnature. Existence is essentially a parallax." What are you going on about? Guitar strings. Toxicologists have determined that the effects of paleo are subject to what species is ingested by the user. Sauropod eaters consistently report feeling immense and are often found with an exploded stomach from consuming copious amounts of vegetable matter. Mammoth eaters sweat profusely and eventually dehydrate. Megalosaurus eaters experience incomparable migraines and tend to commit suicide by gunshot or traumatic impact. Smilodon eaters teeth their canines on steel till their mouths were nests of bloody splinters, and they usually died of bacterial infection afflicting the torn gums. Theropod eaters have been observed to form hunting parties, then proceed to stalk and cannibalize while intoxicated in the streets. The incoherent man resumed his mysterious work and grew deaf to my pleas and epithets. It is bizarre that I have become so angry towards this man. for his is the most interesting thing that the beach has revealed to me. After about 7 minutes, he picked up the rock the size of a skull and beckoned me over, popping tears of amber like birds harvesting gastroliths. The lenses in their eyes reproduce till the eyes resemble those of the arthropod prisoners in their gems. The kaleidoscope is too much. A trilobite was encased in the rock. It was a beautiful fossil despite the right flank being chipped off. The contrast was stark, and the ridges of the segmented exoskeleton were prominent. The compound eyes, sandpapered by the fossilization process, bulged from the lateral sides of the head segment. The man turned the rock in his hands, examining the specimen meticulously. Yes, probably genus Calamine, fat cephalon and trichodeca segmentation, a dead giveaway. Ravers who had ingested carboniferous ferns were found standing dead in a Christ pose, exhaling continuously till their lungs gave out. Like a Roman roadside, the forensic investigator remarked. He set the rock back down on the ground, stooped, and withdrew a mallet and chisel from his coat pockets. Jamming the tip of the chisel against a pressure point in the rock, he raised the mallet and struck the head of the chisel with a rhythm as dynamic as a beating heart. If he was a paleontologist, I should find out what institution he's allied with so his position can be revoked. The fuck? The man hammered the trilobite till it was reduced to rubble. Its remains looked like a pile of rotten teeth. He picked up a shard and oops, lost my place. He picked up a shard with his forefinger and thumb, then scrutinized it. Do you know how we know fossils respired before their tissues were mineralized? You just destroyed. Humanity has suspected that these sculptures are the remains of living things for a long time, but when that Danish saint matched tongue stones with the teeth of a leviathan, he dispelled any honest skepticism. Then we drew anatomical and inferred behavioral connections between the statuesque life of old and the fluid life of young, not only from the specimens themselves, but from adjacent minutiae which suggested what sort of paleoclimate they inhabited. In a sense, they are still considered failed sketches in the scheme of things. Much later, we detected residual biomolecules in the fossils, unfathomable organic wisdom entombed in the lithified dead. Peace be upon all of the dead we know, do not know, will never know, have forgotten. This is what I mean by the sex of stones. I seek the vestigial memories locked in the fossils. Governments have discouraged gift shops the world over to continue selling authentic fossils as souvenirs. And some countries have already taken the initiative to defund natural history museums out of the interest of public safety. He scooped up the Silurian splinters and rose. You look sick, sir. My argument froze on my tongue. Paleontologists are pariahs. Mothers and fathers of dead sons and daughters marinate the airwaves with bitter rivulets, damning methodological naturalism back to the scarcely methodological Aristotle. Creationism revives in the public sphere so families can heal from the trauma. Perhaps not sick, more like exhausted. Everything exhausts me, indeed. Things have become too complicated. Yes. Science is not an illicit substance, read the Pica signs. He places a shard of the fossil into my hand. Swallow it, no need to chew. It will cure you, on 3. I don't know what to say anymore. Ich, ni, san! We toss the fragments towards the back of our throats. I feel my bones giving out, my limbs receding, my mouth shifting, my flesh oozing and calcifying, my torso segmenting, my pupils reproducing asexually, rendering the world a blurry kaleidoscope. Such vivid memories, so unlike the blind artistry of humanity. Two young boys found a pair of human buoys, curled up like pillbugs, bobbing against the dawn, blazing on the water. Thank you. So yes, thank you all for coming out to my lecture. Drowning in Beauty, the Neo-Decadent anthology, will be out on April 30th by Snuggly Books. And yeah, that's basically all I have to say. Thank you.